Marcus Thompson stepped off the double-decker bus at Buckingham Palace, his camera already clicking away at everything in sight. The 28-year-old American tourist had been drinking since noon at various London pubs, celebrating what he called his European adventure with his college buddies from Northwestern University. His speech was slurred, his steps unsteady, and his judgment severely impaired by the 5 pints of beer and 3 shots of whiskey coursing through his system. The summer afternoon was bustling, with tourists from around the world, all eager to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony that drew millions of visitors to London each year. Families with children pressed against the barriers. Elderly couples shared folding chairs they had brought specifically for the occasion, and photography enthusiasts adjusted their expensive camera equipment in preparation for the spectacle. The atmosphere was one of respectful anticipation and cultural appreciation. Marcus pushed through the crowd with the aggressive confidence that only alcohol can provide, loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that he was going to get the best shots ever for his social media followers back home in Chicago. His Instagram account, which boasted a modest 3,000 followers, had been documenting his 2-week European vacation with increasingly reckless content designed to maximize likes and comments. His 3 college friends, Jake, Michael, and David, had initially encouraged Marcus's social media ambitions, but they were growing increasingly uncomfortable with his escalating behavior. What had started as harmless tourist photos in Paris had evolved into progressively more disruptive stunts across Europe. In Amsterdam, he had climbed onto a statue for photos despite clear prohibition signs. In Brussels, he had loudly mocked local customs at a traditional restaurant, embarrassing his companions and fellow diners. Now, standing before one of Britain's most sacred and respected institutions, Marcus's alcohol-fueled arrogance was reaching dangerous new heights. His friends tried to convince him to slow down on the drinking, pointing out that it was barely 4 in the afternoon and suggesting they grab some food to sober up before the ceremony began. Marcus waved them off dismissively, insisting he was totally fine and knew what he was doing. Phrases that had become his dangerous mantra throughout the trip. The Queen's Guard ceremony represented centuries of British military tradition and royal protocol. These were not actors or performers, but active-duty soldiers from elite regiments, including the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards. Each man had undergone rigorous military training and had earned the honor of serving in this prestigious ceremonial role through dedication, discipline, and exemplary service. Marcus, however, saw them merely as props for his photography session and potential viral content. His understanding of British culture came primarily from movies and television shows, giving him a superficial and often inaccurate impression of local customs and the serious nature of royal ceremonies. The concept that these guards were real soldiers with genuine authority and responsibilities was completely lost on his alcohol-impaired reasoning. As the ceremony began, Marcus became increasingly agitated by the barriers keeping tourists at what he considered an unreasonable distance from the action. The crowd control measures implemented for both security and respect reasons frustrated him enormously. He complained loudly about not being able to get close enough for his photos, his voice carrying over the respectful silence that other visitors maintained during the solemn ceremony. Other tourists began giving him uncomfortable looks as his behavior became more disruptive and culturally insensitive. A Japanese family moved away from his immediate vicinity, the parents clearly concerned about their children witnessing his inappropriate conduct. An elderly British couple exchanged disapproving glances, their expressions showing the offense they felt at this American's disrespectful attitude toward their national traditions. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of precision and tradition. The guards moved with mechanical precision, their red tunics and tall bearskin hats creating an iconic image that had remained unchanged for generations. Every step, every movement, every gesture was performed with the exact same precision that had characterized this ceremony for hundreds of years. The crowd watched in respectful silence, appreciating the historical significance and military excellence on display. Marcus, however, grew increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as boring, repetitive movements. His alcohol-impaired attention span couldn't appreciate the subtlety and precision of the ceremony. He wanted action, excitement, something that would translate well to social media and generate the viral engagement he craved. The respectful silence of other tourists only served to highlight his own disruptive behavior. His friends noticed security personnel beginning to take notice of Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior. Metropolitan police officers stationed around the palace grounds had started glancing in their direction, their trained eyes recognizing potential trouble before it escalated. Palace security cameras were undoubtedly capturing every moment of Marcus's growing agitation and disrespectful commentary. Jake whispered urgent warnings to Marcus, trying to explain that this wasn't just a tourist attraction, but a serious military ceremony with real consequences for disruptive behavior. Michael attempted to physically position himself between Marcus and the ceremony, hoping to block his friend's increasingly aggressive movements toward the barriers. David suggested they leave immediately and find somewhere else to spend the afternoon. Sensing that the situation was rapidly approaching the point of no return, Marcus boasted about how he was going to show these toy soldiers what a real American could do. Completely oblivious to the military training and authority of the guards he was mocking, his comments revealed a profound ignorance of military protocol and international respect that would soon cost him dearly. The alcohol had inflated his ego to dangerous proportions while simultaneously destroying his ability to recognize obvious warning signs. The stage was perfectly set for a confrontation that would transform Marcus from an anonymous tourist into an international, a symbol of American tourist behavior at its absolute worst. His decision to cross clearly marked boundaries and ignore established protocols would soon teach him a harsh lesson about respect, consequences, and the unwavering dedication of the Queen's Guard to their duty. Regardless of who might try to interfere, the crowd continued to grow as the ceremony progressed. With hundreds of visitors from dozens of countries gathering to witness this quintessentially British tradition, none of them could have anticipated that they were about to witness something far more memorable than the scheduled ceremony. They were about to see a spectacular example of how quickly tourist arrogance can lead to public humiliation and serious legal consequences. Marcus's journey from confident tourist to international embarrassment was about to begin, and every moment would be captured on dozens of phones and cameras, ensuring that his lesson in respect and consequences would be preserved forever on the internet for the world to see. Marcus's patience finally ran out as he watched other tourists taking what he considered inadequate photos from behind the designated barriers. The rope barriers and clear signage indicating restricted areas seemed to mock his ambitions for viral social media content. Fueled by liquid courage and growing frustration with what he perceived as unnecessary restrictions, he made the fateful decision that would change his life forever. Without warning to his friends or consideration of the consequences, he ducked under the barrier and stepped onto the sacred ceremonial grounds, his iPhone held high above his head like a trophy. The transformation in the crowd's atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. The respectful murmur of appreciation for the ceremony immediately shifted to shocked gasps and pointing fingers as hundreds of tourists witnessed the brazen American violating clearly established boundaries. Several visitors began speaking urgently in their native languages, but the universal tone of disapproval needed no translation. Children in the audience looked confused by the sudden change in adult behavior around them, while their parents instinctively pulled them closer. Sensing that something was about to go very wrong, security cameras positioned strategically around the palace grounds captured every moment as Marcus stumbled slightly on the perfectly manicured ceremonial grounds. His unsteady gait revealed the full extent of his intoxication, making his violation of palace security even more egregious. The precision-maintained grass beneath his feet had been carefully tended for decades, walked upon only by members of the royal family, visiting dignitaries, and the guards themselves during their ceremonial duties. A nearby metropolitan police officer immediately began moving toward Marcus with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with countless tourist incidents over the years. The officer's firm but professional voice called out across the grounds, instructing Marcus to return to the designated tourist area immediately. His words carried the authority of British law and the full weight of palace security protocols that had been refined over centuries of protecting the royal family and their residences. However, Marcus either didn't hear the warnings over his own excited commentary for his phone's video recording, or chose to ignore them entirely in his alcohol-impaired state. He was completely absorbed in narrating his adventure for his social media followers, describing how he was getting exclusive access and showing everyone what these British guards really look like up close. His commentary revealed a complete misunderstanding of the situation's severity and the serious legal consequences he was courting with every step. The officer spoke into his radio with practiced efficiency, alerting additional security personnel and coordination centers throughout the palace complex. Within moments, a coordinated response was being organized, involving multiple layers of palace security, metropolitan police, and specialized protection units. Marcus remained blissfully unaware that his simple act of crossing a rope barrier had triggered a significant security response involving dozens of trained professionals. Marcus began approaching one of the Queen's guards with the swagger of someone who believed himself untouchable. The guard he selected was a tall soldier from the Coldstream Guards, standing at perfect attention despite the brewing commotion around him. Years of military training had prepared this soldier for exactly this type of situation. Though few tourists were ever brazen enough to approach so closely or with such obvious disrespect, the guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead according to protocol, his face expressionless beneath the iconic bearskin hat that had become synonymous with British royal tradition. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. This was not a costume or theatrical prop, but the working uniform of an active-duty soldier who had earned his position through military excellence and unwavering dedication. Marcus, emboldened by what he mistook for inaction or fear, began making increasingly offensive jokes about the guard's stillness. He asked loudly if the soldier was even real or just a fancy wax figure, his voice carrying across the normally respectful atmosphere of the palace grounds. His commentary became more crude and personally insulting as his confidence grew. Apparently believing that the guard's silence indicated weakness or inability to respond, other tourists began pulling out their own phones and cameras, but not to capture the ceremony they had originally come to witness. Instead, they were recording what was clearly about to become a very public incident involving the increasingly intoxicated American tourist. Some visitors from other countries shook their heads in embarrassment, recognizing the type of tourist behavior that gave all travelers a bad reputation abroad: British. Tourists in the crowd looked on with a mixture of anger and anticipation, their expressions showing both offense at the disrespect being shown to their military traditions and eager anticipation for the inevitable consequences. Several elderly visitors, possibly veterans themselves, began moving closer to the scene, their faces showing the kind of controlled anger that comes from watching someone mock institutions they had served or deeply respected. The tension in the air became palpable as Marcus continued his unauthorized approach toward the motionless guard. His three friends called out desperately from behind the barriers, their voices filled with panic as they finally understood the serious trouble their companion was creating. Jake shouted warnings about police and legal consequences, while Michael tried to get the attention of security officers to explain that Marcus was drunk and not thinking clearly. David attempted to climb over the barrier himself to physically restrain Marcus, but was immediately intercepted by security personnel who had positioned themselves strategically around the incident area. The officers were professional but firm in preventing any additional civilians from entering the restricted zone. Even those who claimed to be trying to help resolve the situation, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic as he circled the guard, like a predator stalking prey. He made exaggerated gestures, silly faces, and inappropriate comments while maintaining a constant stream of social media commentary. His phone captured every moment of his own downfall, though he remained convinced he was creating entertainment rather than evidence for his eventual prosecution. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through the tourist areas around Buckingham Palace that something significant was happening during the ceremony. Visitors who had been exploring other areas of the palace grounds began converging on the scene, creating a much larger audience for Marcus's impending humiliation than he could have ever anticipated. Palace security personnel positioned themselves at strategic points around the ceremony area, their coordinated movements invisible to most tourists, but creating an increasingly secure perimeter around the developing incident. These were highly trained professionals who dealt with security threats ranging from simple tourist violations to serious terrorist concerns, and they treated every breach of palace protocols with appropriate seriousness. The moment of reckoning was approaching fast, and Marcus remained completely unprepared for the professional response his disrespectful behavior was about to trigger. His alcohol-impaired judgment had convinced him that he was in control of the situation, but reality was about to deliver a harsh lesson in respect, consequences, and the serious nature of British military traditions. Marcus positioned himself directly in front of the Coldstream Guard, placing himself barely 3 feet away from the soldiers' perfectly polished boots. The proximity was not only inappropriate, but represented a serious breach of security protocols that had been established for both the safety of the guards and the maintenance of ceremonial dignity. With his iPhone recording in high definition, he began performing what he considered comedy gold for his social media audience. Completely oblivious to the growing tension surrounding him, he started making exaggerated facial expressions designed to contrast with the guard's stoic professionalism, sticking out his tongue, crossing his eyes, and making ridiculous gestures that he found hilarious in his intoxicated state. The alcohol had completely destroyed his ability to recognize social cues or understand the inappropriate nature of his behavior. His performance was being recorded, not only on his own phone, but on dozens of other devices held by increasingly horrified tourists who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The guard remained perfectly still, his military training evident in every fiber of his being. Years of rigorous discipline had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, and his response was measured, professional, and completely controlled. However, those observing closely could see the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw as Marcus's behavior became increasingly disrespectful and personally offensive. The soldier's restraint was remarkable, demonstrating the exceptional training and character required to serve in the Queen's Guard. Marcus began speaking in an exaggerated mock British accent, his attempt at mimicry revealing both his ignorance of actual British speech patterns and his complete disrespect for the culture he was visiting. His commentary became increasingly crude and personally insulting, making jokes about the guard's uniform, questioning his masculinity, and suggesting that British soldiers were inferior to their American counterparts. Each comment revealed a deeper level of cultural insensitivity and personal arrogance. The crowd's reaction was becoming increasingly hostile toward Marcus, with several British tourists beginning to shout at him to stop his disrespectful display. Their voices carried genuine anger at the insults being directed toward their military traditions and the individual soldier who represented centuries of British military honor. The international nature of the crowd meant that Marcus's behavior was being judged not only by British standards but by visitors from cultures worldwide who recognized and respected military dignity. An elderly veteran, recognizable by his military bearing despite wearing civilian clothes, stepped forward from the crowd and attempted to reason with Marcus. The old soldier's voice carried the authority of someone who had served his country with distinction, and he tried to explain the significance and dignity of the Queen's Guard tradition. He spoke of the military training, the honor of selection, and the serious nature of the ceremonial duties being performed. Marcus laughed off the veteran's intervention with the cruel dismissiveness that only alcohol and arrogance can produce. He waved away the old soldier's words as old-fashioned nonsense and suggested that modern Americans had moved beyond such outdated military theater. His response drew gasps of outrage from British tourists and looks of disgust from international visitors who recognized the disrespect being shown to both the active duty guard and the veteran attempting to educate this ignorant tourist. The situation escalated dramatically when Marcus decided to reach out toward the guard's iconic bearskin hat, apparently intending to touch or adjust it for his video. This action represented a critical crossing of lines that even the most patient security protocols could not tolerate. The Queen's Guard are authorized and trained to take decisive action when their person or equipment is threatened. And Marcus's gesture constituted exactly the type of physical interference that triggers immediate response protocols. The crowd collectively held its breath as they sensed that Marcus had finally pushed his luck too far. Even tourists unfamiliar with British military traditions could recognize that attempting to touch an on-duty soldier's uniform or equipment was completely unacceptable behavior in any country. The tension in the air became electric as hundreds of people anticipated the inevitable response to Marcus's escalating aggression. Security. Personnel were now converging on the scene from multiple directions, their coordinated movement creating a tightening circle around the developing incident. Metropolitan police officers, palace security guards, and specialized protection units were all moving into position with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this type of scenario. Their radio communications were constant as they coordinated their response and ensured that all necessary backup was in position. Marcus remained completely oblivious to the approaching consequences of his actions. His attention focused entirely on his phone screen and the comments already beginning to appear from his live social media broadcast. His followers were reacting with a mixture of excitement and concern, some encouraging his behavior, while others warned him that he was about to get himself into serious trouble. The alcohol had completely impaired his ability to process these warnings or recognize the danger he had created. His 3 friends had given up shouting warnings from behind the barriers and were now recording the incident themselves, perhaps hoping to have evidence of what was about to unfold that might help in Marcus's eventual legal defense. Jake was frantically trying to contact the American embassy through his phone, while Michael was attempting to get the attention of police officers to explain that Marcus was intoxicated and not thinking clearly. David had begun taking photos of the incident scene, documenting the crowd size and the security response for potential legal purposes. The guards' training and discipline were being tested to their absolute limits as Marcus continued his inappropriate behavior. Military protocol required maintaining position and composure unless directly threatened. But the soldiers' patience was not unlimited. Every member of the Queen's Guard had been trained in appropriate response procedures for exactly this type of situation, and Marcus was rapidly approaching the point where those procedures would be implemented. Other tourists in the crowd began creating additional space around the incident, their instincts telling them that the situation was about to escalate significantly. Parents pulled their children away from the immediate area, while photographers adjusted their positions to ensure they could capture whatever was about to happen. The ceremonial atmosphere had been completely destroyed, replaced by the tension of an impending confrontation. Marcus's behavior reached its peak of disrespect as he began making crude gestures and comments about the guard's stoic expression, suggesting that the soldier was either stupid or too scared to respond. His taunts became more personal and insulting, revealing the ugly American stereotype at its absolute worst. The alcohol had stripped away any pretense of civility or cultural awareness, leaving only arrogance and ignorance on full display. The moment of reckoning was now inevitable, and every person in the crowd could sense it approaching. Marcus's journey from confident tourist to public spectacle was about to reach its climax, and the professional response he was about to receive would demonstrate exactly why the Queen's Guard had maintained their reputation for discipline and authority for centuries. His disrespectful performance was about to meet its match in British military professionalism, and the collision would be spectacular in its one-sided nature. The moment Marcus's hand moved toward the guard's bearskin hat, the soldier exploded into action with military precision that shocked everyone present into absolute silence. In one swift, practiced movement that demonstrated years of military training, the guard stepped forward and delivered a thunderous verbal command that echoed across the palace grounds like a cannon shot fired in battle. "Get back!" he roared, his voice carrying the full authority of centuries of military tradition. Royal protection protocols and personal discipline that had been forged through rigorous training. The transformation was so sudden and dramatic that it seemed almost supernatural to witnesses. One moment, the guard had appeared as motionless as a statue, and the next, he had become a commanding military presence whose authority filled the entire ceremonial area. His voice contained layers of power, the authority of the crown he served, the discipline of elite military training, and the personal strength of a soldier who had earned his position through excellence and dedication. Marcus stumbled backward in complete shock, his iPhone nearly slipping from suddenly trembling hands as the full reality of his situation crashed down upon him like a physical blow. The transformation of the seemingly motionless figure into an intimidating military professional happened so quickly that Marcus's alcohol-fogged brain couldn't process what had just occurred. His cocky demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by wide-eyed fear as he found himself face to face with a highly trained soldier who was no longer tolerating his disrespectful behavior. The guards' second in command came even louder and more forceful than the first. If such a thing were possible, move away from the Queen's Guard. The words reverberated through the air with such tremendous force that tourists 50 yards away could hear every syllable with crystal clarity. The command was delivered with the kind of authority that brooked no argument, no negotiation, and no further testing of patience. This was not a request or suggestion. It was a military order delivered by someone with both the training and authorization to enforce compliance. Marcus's legs felt weak beneath him as the reality of his situation finally penetrated through his alcoholic haze like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. This wasn't a tourist attraction or a photo opportunity designed for his entertainment. He was confronting a real soldier with real authority, real training, and real power to respond to threats and disrespectful behavior. The alcohol that had made him feel invincible now left him vulnerable and exposed, his artificial confidence replaced by genuine fear. The crowd erupted in a mixture of spontaneous applause, nervous laughter, and expressions of satisfaction as tourists from around the world witnessed the disrespectful American finally receiving his overdue comeuppance. British spectators were particularly vocal in their approval, clearly pleased that their military traditions were being properly defended by a soldier who embodied the best qualities of their armed forces. The applause continued for several seconds, creating a soundtrack of approval for the guard's professional response. Children in the crowd pointed and stared at Marcus with the uninhibited curiosity that only young people possess, while their parents used the incident as an impromptu lesson about respecting other cultures and following rules when visiting foreign countries. Several families began discussing the importance of appropriate behavior and cultural sensitivity, using Marcus as a perfect example of how not to conduct oneself while traveling abroad. The guard's presence seemed to expand and fill the entire ceremonial area as he maintained his commanding position. His military bearing was absolutely perfect, shoulders squared, posture erect, eyes focused directly on the threat before him with unwavering intensity. Every aspect of his stance communicated military authority and professional competence. This was a soldier who had been trained to protect the crown and its institutions, and he was demonstrating exactly why that training was so rigorous and comprehensive. Security officers reached Marcus within seconds of the guard's verbal intervention, their coordinated response demonstrating the professional security apparatus that surrounded every royal ceremony. The lead officer began speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with additional personnel throughout the palace complex, while keeping his trained eyes fixed on the now sobering American tourist. The efficiency of their response revealed the serious nature of palace security and the immediate consequences for anyone foolish enough to breach established protocols. Marcus's three friends watched helplessly from behind the barriers, their vacation companion's situation having escalated far beyond anything they could have anticipated when they decided to visit Buckingham Palace that afternoon. Jake was frantically attempting to contact legal assistance through his phone, while Michael was trying to explain to nearby police officers that Marcus was intoxicated and not thinking clearly. David continued documenting the incident, perhaps hoping that evidence of Marcus's condition might help in eventual legal proceedings. Metropolitan police officers who surrounded Marcus displayed the same level of professionalism as the guard who had confronted him. Their movements were coordinated, efficient, and completely controlled as they assessed the situation and prepared to take the drunk tourists into custody. Years of dealing with similar incidents had given them extensive experience in handling intoxicated tourists who had crossed legal boundaries while visiting London's many attractions. Other tourists in the immediate area began creating additional space around the incident, their instincts correctly telling them that the situation was far from over. Photographers and videographers adjusted their positions to ensure clear documentation of what was obviously going to be a significant arrest. The incident had completely disrupted the ceremonial atmosphere, but most visitors seemed satisfied that appropriate action was being taken. Against someone who had shown such blatant disrespect, the guards' response had been textbook perfect. According to military protocols for dealing with civilian interference, his verbal commands were clear, authoritative, and appropriate for the level of threat presented. He had demonstrated remarkable restraint in allowing Marcus's behavior to continue as long as it had. But when physical contact became imminent, his response was immediate, professional, and completely effective in neutralizing the situation. Marcus attempted to speak, perhaps to apologize or explain his behavior, but his words came out as incoherent mumbling that revealed the full extent of his intoxication. The alcohol that had given him the courage to breach palace security now prevented him from articulating any coherent defense of his actions. His attempts at communication only served to further demonstrate his impaired condition and the poor judgment that had led to his current predicament. The ceremonial grounds, which had been violated by Marcus's unauthorized presence, seemed to regain their dignity as security personnel moved to remove him from the sacred space. The precision-maintained grass and perfectly ordered ceremonial area would soon return to their proper state, but the incident would be remembered by everyone present as a perfect example of what happened when tourist arrogance met military professionalism. The guard returned to his ceremonial position with the same military precision he had shown in confronting Marcus, but the message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity to every tourist present. The Queen's Guard were not decorative figures to be mocked, touched, or treated as entertainment props. They were active-duty soldiers with the training, authority, and legal backing to protect themselves and their ceremonial duties from anyone foolish enough to cross established boundaries, regardless of their nationality, tourist status, or level of intoxication. The incident had lasted only minutes, but its impact would be felt for years as video footage spread across social media platforms worldwide, serving as a permanent reminder of the consequences that await those who show disrespect to British military traditions and the dedicated soldiers who maintain them with such unwavering professionalism and dignity. The Metropolitan police officers wasted no time in taking Marcus into custody, their professional efficiency making his arrest swift, thorough, and completely by the book. As the distinctive click of handcuffs echoed behind his back, Marcus's alcohol-induced confidence completely crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane, replaced by the dawning realization that his harmless fun had serious legal consequences that would follow him for years to come. His attempts to explain himself were met with the standard police caution delivered in the crisp, professional manner that British law enforcement had perfected. Over generations of dealing with similar incidents, the officers informed Marcus of his rights with mechanical precision, their words carrying the full weight of British law and legal procedure. Every phrase was delivered clearly and professionally, ensuring that there could be no later claims of improper arrest procedures or violations of his rights as an American citizen. The legal machinery had been set in motion, and Marcus was about to discover that tourist status provided no protection against the consequences of breaking British law on royal property. The crowd's reaction was a complex mixture of justice served and second-hand embarrassment. as hundreds of international visitors watched this spectacular downfall unfold in real time. Many tourists continued filming with their phones and cameras as Marcus was led away, capturing every moment of his transformation from arrogant tourist to defeated criminal defendant. The contrast between his earlier swagger and his current defeated posture was stark and unmistakable, providing a powerful visual lesson about the consequences of disrespectful behavior. The very iPhone that Marcus had used to record his disrespectful behavior was now evidence in his own criminal case. Confiscated by officers who had witnessed his entire performance from multiple angles, the device contained not only his own incriminating footage but also his live social media broadcast, which had been automatically saved and was already being shared across various platforms. His own technology had become the primary evidence against him, creating an ironic twist that would not be lost on legal professionals handling his case. Marcus's three friends called out desperately from behind the barriers, their voices filled with panic and confusion as they watched their vacation companion being arrested by foreign police. Jake shouted questions about where Marcus was being taken, while Michael frantically tried to get information about legal representation and embassy contact procedures. David continued documenting the arrest, though his earlier excitement about the trip had been completely replaced by concern about the legal and financial implications of their friends' spectacular stupidity. The officers responded to the friends' questions with professional courtesy, but maintained their focus on properly processing Marcus's arrest. They provided basic information about police procedures, while making it clear that Marcus's friends would need to contact appropriate legal and consular authorities if they wanted to help with his situation. The arrest was being conducted according to established protocols, and civilian interference would not be tolerated regardless of the good intentions behind it. Marcus's humiliation deepened exponentially as he was walked through the crowd of international visitors, many of whom now recognized him as the drunk American tourist who had just made a complete fool of himself before the Queen's Guard. Comments in various languages followed, his path like a soundtrack of international disapproval. Though the tone was universally critical regardless of the specific words being used, his face, flushed with shame rather than alcohol, became a mask of regret and fear. British tourists were particularly vocal in their criticism, with several shouting pointed remarks about disrespectful Americans and proper behavior around military personnel. Their comments reflected genuine anger at seeing their national traditions mocked by someone who clearly had no understanding or appreciation of British culture. The incident had reinforced negative stereotypes about American tourists that would take years for other visitors to overcome through their own respectful behavior. The walk to the police vehicles seemed to take forever, with each step adding layers to Marcus's growing sense of shame and regret. His legs, still unsteady from the considerable amount of alcohol he had consumed throughout the day, nearly gave out twice during the escort. Officers were required to provide physical support to prevent a fall that would have added physical injury to his already severely wounded pride and dignity. International news crews and photographers, always present around major London landmarks like Buckingham Palace, captured every moment of Marcus's arrest and removal from the scene with professional efficiency. His face, contorted with embarrassment and genuine fear about his uncertain future, would soon be broadcast across international media as a perfect example of tourist behavior gone horribly wrong. The incident was already being packaged as a news story with global appeal. The viral content that Marcus had sought to create had indeed been achieved, but as the subject of worldwide ridicule rather than admiration or entertainment. His social media followers were already sharing and commenting on the footage, with the reactions ranging from amusement to horror at his behavior. The incident was being discussed on travel forums, cultural blogs, and news websites as an example of how quickly tourist adventures could turn into legal nightmares. Marcus's arrest was being processed according to standard Metropolitan Police procedures, but the high-profile nature of the incident and the royal property location meant that additional attention would be paid to every aspect of his case. His actions had not only violated multiple laws, but it also created an international incident that reflected poorly on American tourists and required careful handling by both British and American diplomatic personnel as the police van doors closed. Behind him, with a final, decisive click, Marcus caught his last glimpse of Buckingham Palace through the rear window's reinforced glass. The Queen's Guard had already returned to their ceremonial positions with the same dignity and professionalism they had maintained throughout his disruption. Their discipline and composure remained intact, despite his best efforts to provoke a different response. Demonstrating the superiority of their training and character, the palace grounds were slowly returning to their normal ceremonial atmosphere as tourists refocused their attention on the legitimate ceremony they had come to witness. However, the incident had left a lasting impression on everyone present, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of cultural respect and appropriate behavior when visiting foreign countries and their most sacred institutions. Marcus's final thought before the van pulled away from the scene was the sickening realization that his parents back in Chicago, his employer at the marketing firm, and everyone he had ever known would soon be seeing footage of his spectacular public humiliation. The incident would follow him for the rest of his life, attached to his name in internet searches and social media profiles, serving as a permanent reminder of the day his arrogance and alcohol consumption led to international embarrassment. The police van merged into London traffic, carrying Marcus away from the scene of his downfall toward a legal system that would soon teach him about the serious consequences of disrespecting British military traditions, violating royal property protocols, and behaving like an entitled tourist who believed himself above the laws and customs of the country he was visiting. His adventure and viral social media content creation had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, but as a cautionary tale rather than the entertainment he had intended to produce. Within hours of his arrest, videos of Marcus's confrontation with the Queen's Guard had exploded across social media platforms worldwide with the kind of viral intensity that usually required marketing teams and advertising budgets to achieve. The footage, captured simultaneously by dozens of tourists from multiple angles using phones, tablets, and professional cameras, showed every moment of his disrespectful behavior and subsequent humiliation in devastating high-definition detail that left nothing to the imagination. News outlets from CNN to the BBC picked up the story with enthusiasm, using headlines that described him as the drunk American tourist, the disrespectful visitor, and the palace intruder who had learned a harsh lesson about British military traditions and royal protocols. The story had everything news editors loved: cultural conflict, military discipline, tourist misbehavior, and spectacular consequences, all wrapped up in easily digestible video content that could be broadcast repeatedly without losing impact. International media coverage expanded the story beyond simple tourist misbehavior into broader discussions about American cultural awareness abroad, the importance of military traditions, and the consequences of social media-driven behavior that prioritized viral content over personal dignity and legal compliance. Cultural commentators used Marcus's incident as a jumping-off point for examining the darker aspects of social media culture and the lengths people would go to achieve online fame. Marcus spent his first night in a London police cell. The stark reality of his situation compounded by a massive hangover that made every sound feel like a hammer blow to his already aching head. The combination of alcohol withdrawal, fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable sleeping conditions, and the constant noise of a busy police station created a perfect storm of physical misery that matched his emotional devastation perfectly. When he was finally allowed to make phone calls the following morning, Marcus discovered that his employer back in Chicago had already seen the viral videos through multiple news sources and social media platforms. The marketing firm where he worked as a junior account executive had strict policies about employee conduct that reflected on the company's reputation, and his international humiliation had triggered an immediate internal review of his employment status that would likely result in termination. His parents, mortified by their son's behavior and the international attention it had attracted, struggled to understand how their college-educated son had made such catastrophically poor decisions while representing not just himself, but America abroad. His mother cried during their brief phone conversation, expressing shame about the disgrace he had brought upon their family name, while his father spoke in clipped, angry tones about responsibility, consequences, and the expensive legal mess Marcus had created for himself. The legal consequences proved severe and far-reaching for what Marcus had initially considered harmless tourist fun. British prosecutors charged him with multiple offenses, including disorderly conduct, trespassing on government property, interfering with military personnel in the execution of their duties, and public intoxication on royal grounds. Each charge carried significant penalties, and the high-profile nature of his case meant that prosecutors were unlikely to offer lenient plea arrangements. British authorities took these charges with utmost seriousness, particularly given the international attention the incident had attracted and the need to demonstrate that royal property and military ceremonies were protected by real legal consequences. The Crown Prosecution Service assigned experienced attorneys to ensure that Marcus's case was handled with appropriate gravity and that the penalties would serve as a deterrent to future incidents of similar tourist misbehavior. His tourist visa was immediately revoked by immigration authorities, and he faced deportation proceedings that would begin immediately after his criminal case concluded. The revocation meant that Marcus would be permanently banned from entering the United Kingdom for a minimum of 10 years, effectively ending any future travel plans he might have had for Europe and severely limiting his international mobility for the foreseeable future. Marcus's three friends, who had watched helplessly as their vacation companion destroyed his reputation and future in a matter of minutes, found themselves unwillingly associated with his international infamy through social media posts, news coverage, and witness statements they were required to provide to authorities. Their own holiday was cut short as they dealt with consular officials, legal representatives, and media inquiries while trying to distance themselves from Marcus's actions. The trip they had planned as a celebration of their college friendship and successful career launches had become a nightmare of legal complications, unexpected expenses, and public embarrassment. Jake, Michael, and David found themselves fielding questions from friends, family, and employers about their association with the palace tourist whose behavior had made international headlines and reflected poorly on American travelers everywhere. The financial cost of Marcus's brief moment of viral fame proved absolutely staggering when calculated in its entirety. Legal representation by qualified British solicitors cost thousands of pounds. Court fees and fines added additional thousands. Emergency flight changes required premium pricing, and his lost employment meant months of reduced income while searching for new work in a competitive job market made more difficult by his international notoriety. Conservative estimates placed his total financial losses at over $25,000, not including the intangible costs to his reputation, career prospects, and personal relationships. His attempt to create memorable social media content had succeeded far beyond his wildest dreams, but as an expensive cautionary tale rather than profitable entertainment or personal branding success. The Queen's Guard, whom Marcus had mocked and attempted to touch, continued their ceremonial duties with the same unwavering dignity and professionalism they had maintained for centuries. His incident had briefly disrupted their ceremony but had ultimately enhanced their reputation by demonstrating their appropriate response to disrespectful behavior and their commitment to maintaining proper protocols, regardless of tourist interference. Years later, Marcus's name remained permanently linked to the incident through internet searches that potential employers, romantic partners, and social acquaintances could easily discover. The phrase Marcus Thompson Palace Guard became synonymous with tourist misbehavior, ensuring that his 5 minutes of viral fame served as a lasting reminder that actions have consequences that extend far beyond the moment of poor decision-making. His social media profiles, which had originally motivated his quest for viral content, became monuments to his spectacular failure in judgment. The incident videos continued to circulate and be shared years after the original event, accumulating millions of views and serving as educational content for travel websites, cultural awareness programs, and social media responsibility courses taught in schools and universities worldwide. Marcus eventually found new employment, though at a significantly lower salary and with reduced responsibilities compared to his previous position. His international incident remained a permanent part of his background check results, limiting his career advancement opportunities and requiring explanations in job interviews that often led to uncomfortable conversations about judgment, reliability, and professional representation. The incident's impact extended beyond Marcus's personal consequences to broader discussions about American tourist behavior abroad, social media culture's influence on decision-making, and the importance of cultural education before international travel. Travel blogs, cultural websites, and educational institutions used his case study to illustrate the serious consequences that could result from seemingly harmless tourist misbehavior. His story became required reading in some college courses focused on international relations, cultural sensitivity, and social media responsibility. Professors used his case to demonstrate how quickly individual actions could escalate into international incidents with lasting personal, professional, and diplomatic consequences that extended far beyond the original moment of poor judgment. The Queen's Guard, meanwhile, continued their ceremonial duties with enhanced respect from international visitors who had witnessed or heard about their professional handling of Marcus's disruption. Their response had demonstrated exactly why. These soldiers maintained their reputation for discipline, authority, and unwavering commitment to their duties, regardless of the challenges or disrespect they might face from ignorant tourists. Marcus's journey from confident tourist to international symbol of American entitlement and disrespect served as a powerful reminder that some boundaries should never be crossed. Some traditions deserve universal respect, and some consequences follow you home, regardless of how far you travel to escape them. His viral fame had achieved exactly what he sought, but as a cautionary tale rather than the entertainment he had intended. To create for his social media followers and personal brand development,